Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh, good afternoon. Happy Tuesday, happy election day. Oh my gosh. So at least for 75 minutes, or hopefully uh, from your perspective, some portion of the 75 minutes, we can distract you from the rest of the world that is going on outside of this Zoom classroom. How is everybody? Doing okay? So expect a message in the next 2 days or so with an attachment with someone's response paper. So completing the second response paper and reviewing someone else's response paper are the way in which you sort of just check the box. There is no sort of substantive grade for the second response paper. Um, so look for that in your inbox in the next couple days, and it will come with instructions as in terms of what to do on that front. So that is that bit of administrative business. I'm trying to think if there's any other bit of administrative business. Anything on anybody's mind? We're good with where we are, where we're going, what we're doing, etc. We have one more response paper due in a few weeks. That one will be like the first, graded, regular. Um, Planning, yeah. So anything? We're good? Yeah, Heather?
I was just wondering how you're going to format the midterm, the final compared to like your constitutional law class or property class.
Very differently. You want more specifics?
Yeah, like
Okay.
because I know a lot of this class is discussion based, and
Yeah.
it's less heavy on case law and exact black letter law. So I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah. So if you have taken either the property and or the con law exam, um, this is different than both. You'll know if you've taken both, you know that con law was very different from property, and you'll note that this one is different than both. So what I think, just from an administrative standpoint, what you'll see is the exam distributed via Twin close to the last day of class, if not on the last day of class. So at that point, pre-Thanksgiving, the questions will be available to you. So you will then have until the end of the exam period to upload your answers via Twin. So hopefully I've said that before and that's not surprising to anybody. It is, as you're saying, Heather, more of a discussion-based course, and I think therefore it is more of a discussion-based exam, just like your response papers are discussion-based. Different from a response paper in that it is a lot more directed. So there will be a specific question, two specific questions, in fact, that you will be asked to respond to. One of those questions historically has been more of a law kind of question, like you're the lawyer for a school district. Here's this policy that's being considered. What are some of the things that you might, the arguments or tricks, that you might utilize in order to uh, either defend or try to strike down this particular policy. So that's usually one of the questions. And then the other question is a lot more open-ended, like with these big ideas. Let's say we're talking about difference consciousness and difference blindness. There might be like an introductory summary that says, there's a tension between the desire to give students precisely what they need, difference consciousness, and the desire to treat all students the same, difference blindness. Using the materials from our course, identify two examples of each and evaluate the strengths of each perspective, or something like that. So that is a very open-ended discussion type question. But the key thing I want y'all to hear me say is that the key part of that second type of question is using the materials from our course. So I'm really looking specifically for, okay, in this case or in this circumstance, we see difference consciousness, or in this circumstance, we see difference consciousness, or in this you see what I'm saying? So I really want you to tether it to examples from the course in that, really in both questions, but especially in that kind of big open-ended kind of question. So that's what you can expect. It's only 50%, which is, not only, but relative to a typical law school exam only. Yeah. So that's the final. And like I said, you'll have, pretty much an unlimited amount of time to do it. But you'll obviously be in your exam, taking other exams and doing other things. There is a page limit, and that is how I stop you from sending me long answers, extraordinarily long answers. So my first year teaching remedies many years ago, I had a assignment where students were supposed to prepare a damages memo for a case. And I did not put a page limit on it. I didn't think that was necessary. I thought there was only so much to do. And a student turned in a 72-page damages memo, which I docked on the grounds that that's bad judgment. Okay, that's bad judgment, that no one would want to read a 72-page damages memo if you were, a lawyer for, if you were a junior associate giving that to a senior associate, unless they said something like, I want every detail of every single thing, then submitting 72 pages is a bad idea. Anyway, the students still did very well. Obviously, they said everything that you could possibly say. But I did have a talk with them about discretion. So now I know, and so I put a page limit. Anything else? Heather, hopefully that answers it. Other questions? Okay. So on Friday, we were talking about this standards movement, and today we are going to connect the standards movement to school choice. And really, we're at this point, I hope you're able to sort of see, we're in, we're in the thick of 21st century education reform. And, what I want to try to keep bringing up is the extent to which these reforms are continuations of a longer story towards equity or more equitable opportunities in education, the story that we've really been telling in a lot of different ways over the course of this class, and how maybe sometimes these reforms of the 21st century are not connected to that lens. And so I want us to kind of be attentive to that idea that the course's question doesn't change, right? The course's question is, how do you pursue social change using law, and in particular in the education space? And though we've been talking mostly in our course about access and sort of equitable outcomes in education, these topics are a little harder to fit into that frame. So sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And so I just want to keep coming back to that particular question on these topics like accountability and school choice, which is where we are. So let me just sort of review where we were and what we know about the standards movement. So we talked about No Child Left Behind and what it did with the mandate that states have these standards and assessments and accountability schemes. And we talked about, so that's like the achievement focus of it. They have to have standards, they have to have curriculum, they have to assess, and they have to have accountability when students don't make it. And then we had my pathetic little chart here of showing sort of the way that the AYP process worked, that the goal was 100% proficiency for all students in all subgroups by 2014. So there's very much an equity angle to No Child Left Behind. For the first time really in American history, we had extensive reporting disaggregated by race, disaggregated by income, disaggregated by gender, disaggregated by English proficiency, disaggregated by disability status. We had that data in a way that we had really never had in American history as a result of No Child Left Behind. And again, I think I mentioned this on Friday, it's worth reiterating, that data is only as valuable as the tests themselves. And there's an entire other course, probably at the Graduate School of Education here, that would be about the validity, reliability, and wisdom of using standardized tests or single measure standardized tests to make any kind of decision. That I'm just going to set aside as kind of beyond our purview. I suppose a court might have to consider that in some universe, but that's kind of outside the bounds of our class. We are going to just note that there are tests and that they do provide data, and kind of leave that other conversation for a different course. And so we talked about how the best way to get 100% proficiency by 2014 is to define proficiency really, really low, and to say, well, since we as states maintain our autonomy, because No Child Left Behind couldn't really mandate any standards, it could just say, states, you have to have standards and your students have to be proficient in those standards by 2014. States said, okay, well, we can't risk losing our federal funding. So what we're going to do is define our standards fairly, in a fairly loose manner, in a fairly low manner. And that way we'll increase our chances of getting to 100% proficiency. In fact, many states had a situation in which they first adopted really kind of what they would call world-class standards. And then the reports came out and they had like 12 and 13% proficiency numbers. And that's really bad publicity. And then, so what they did was sort of on the path towards 2014, they said, well, that's making us look really bad. So why don't we just redefine our standards and redefine proficiency, so that now last year there were only 13% proficient and the next year there's 72% proficient. And then not only do you get the bump from going from 13 to 72, which obviously, you know, the story that I'm telling you obviously is a completely false sense of massive improvement. Now you are able to sort of reframe the way you talk about your schools as saying, look how good we're doing. And you know, it's all kind of behind the scenes. You've just manipulated the proficiency measures. And so a side topic that might come up in discussion here that I encourage you to think about is, what is gained or lost from framing a school as failing? You know, let's say you set world-class standards and 13% proficiency is the number that you get. Like, is that good because you're setting world-class standards and you're pushing, you know, to achieve, you know, there's obviously work to do, but you're setting the bar high and you're saying, let's get there? Or is it demoralizing to the extent that now the school is labeled failing, and that perception is difficult to shake, and so it's more dangerous. It's in fact safer to set lower standards. You know, what is the kind of PR angle, the perception angle that goes along with the reporting that comes with No Child Left Behind? And so the story that I was beginning to tell and that I kind of left in the middle was this concern that there is no way we're all going to get to proficiency by 2014. And so many states lower their standards. And obviously that is not the goal of No Child Left Behind. The goal was to elevate standards, right? If the story I'm telling is that there was this report in 1983 that said that American education is in crisis and therefore we need standards. But then the law that mandates the standards ends up kind of incentivizing states to lower their standards. That doesn't seem to be addressing the concern raised in the 1983 report. In fact, it just seems to be obscuring that concern and probably making it last even longer. So that is what sort of ends up being the legacy of No Child Left Behind, beginning in, like, let's say 2009, 10, in that period. And part of that is because the statute was never really reauthorized. And instead of focusing on reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, there was the Great Recession. And so the Great Recession, y'all may know about the giant stimulus package in the early days of the 2008, 2009 economic breakdown. But what you might not know is that something like 500, I better say the right one. It must be million. I was for a second thinking it might be billion, but that couldn't be 500 billion. So I think it's 500 million. Let's just say it's a lot of money is made available. So the stimulus package is like $1 trillion that's going to be spread all over the place. But within that trillion is a significant chunk that is made available to states and school districts as part of a grant program called Race to the Top. So, you see what they did? It was a race to the bottom. And so they flipped it and they made it race to the top. And they said, look, we are not going to punish you if you don't get to proficiency by 2014. We really would rather you have higher standards, better standards, pushing this, the nation's future in a sort of robust direction. And so what starts happening with these grants is that states, nobody gets them like automatically, but if states can demonstrate certain things, then they're eligible for the grants. And in fact, Tennessee is the first state to receive a significant amount of money under the Race to the Top grant program, because there was a special session of the legislature convened to do things that the federal government was encouraging to be done. Among those things were lifting the cap on the number of charter schools in the state, tying teacher pay to performance on the standardized tests, and various other sort of standards-based and choice-based mechanisms. So the Obama administration, in the implementation of Race to the Top, is using the funding, again, taking a sort of big picture, how does the federal government play a role in education policy? This is one of the ways. It's one of the non-court ways in which they do so, by making funding available and by incentivizing states or school districts to adopt certain policies. And that's exactly what happened in Tennessee. And we as a state were huge recipients of the first round of Race to the Top funding. Then, as the 2014 date looms even closer, states are all out of compliance. School districts, it ends up being something like 92 to 95% of school districts are labeled, quote, failing, because no one is making up this last bit to 100% proficiency. Like, they're stalling at this point of proficiency, and they're not able to get to 100%. And so what the Obama administration does at this time is to say, okay, well, we as the Department of Education have the authority to grant waivers, right? So the law says you have to be 100% proficient, but we can actually decide whether or not to sort of bring down the hammer on that if you don't make 100% proficiency. And so why don't you apply for a waiver? And so what states do is they say, okay, well, we would like a waiver because we don't want our entire school system to be shut down as failing. So what do we need to include in our application? And the Obama administration said, okay, here are some things we would like for you to include in your waiver application. Among those are the same kinds of things that we saw in Race to the Top. So less restrictions on the opening of charter schools, which we're going to talk a little more in depth about charter schools. So fewer restrictions on charter schools, greater autonomy for charter schools, stronger accountability within state systems, and then most controversially, they strongly encouraged adoption of what was called and is called the Common Core state standards. And so this was the closest that we have come to sort of a federal endorsement of a certain curriculum. And so states could say, okay, well, we will adopt the Common Core so that we can get our waiver from No Child Left Behind. And the Common Core was not a federally developed curriculum. In fact, it was, during this era of Race to the Bottom, a bunch of states came together and said, well, what would make more sense would be if instead of 50 states developing their own standards, we had states sort of come together and say, we would like to have sort of a unified set of standards. And that's what the Common Core is, a state-led curriculum, essentially, a state-led curriculum development process. But the Obama administration liked it and made it a, not like you have to do it, but a strongly encouraged thing that you would have to do in order to get your waiver from No Child Left Behind. Have y'all heard of the Common Core? Anybody, just if we played word association, what do you think you know about the Common Core? Because it became a huge political football in this period.
Difficult math.
Who's trying to talk here?
Oh, it was Heather.
Okay.
I just think I don't know much about it, but the math is like impossible.
Okay, so we've got Chelsea and Heather now acknowledging the math is impossible.
No, it's beautiful. The math is so beautiful in Common Core.
Beautiful math. Terrible, says Sarah. Parents griping about the math.
My brother did Common Core like in elementary school, and my grandfather would like try to help him with the math problems, and like he couldn't do it because the teachers would want them to show their works in a very specific way, and if you didn't show your work in that way, even if you got the right answer, it wasn't Common Core and they wouldn't allow it. So I know like a lot of older generations really don't like it.
Yeah. So am I hearing from Caitlin and David? I just want to make sure that this is not sarcasm, that this is a genuine endorsement of the way of the teaching. What was it that you guys liked?
So at least for math, the whole idea is to go from to not have like memorizable, like when you learn your multiplication facts, when you're young, you are taught to memorize them, like 2 times 2 equals 4. Instead, Common Core says, well, what if we had 2 equal groups of 2? How much is that? And so I've got 2 groups of 2 fingers on one hand, 2 groups of 2 fingers on the other hand. Then you can actually always take that abstract concept and be more conceptual with it and count like, oh, there's 4 fingers there and I can draw it. And I like it so much because especially like in property class, I found myself drawing out diagrams and pictures of things. And I did much better because I had this like Common Core background. I've been teaching it and teaching my kids to draw, like, how can you draw a picture? How can you demonstrate this or whatever? And so even for myself as an adult, I was like, oh, wow, it actually really is very helpful. So I think you just equip kids with tools to solve any problems rather than just know what 2 times 2 is.
Yeah, there's been a big push actually to move rule against perpetuities out of the first year property course and into 4th grade math on the idea that this is how you learn a principle and a concept that will be really valuable to you when you get to law school. Evan, I see your hand up, or is this yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I also taught it for 4 years. I I understand, like I think Rose put in the chat, like parents didn't really like it because it is so different than the way that like it was different than the way that I learned how to do it. I enjoyed the challenge of figuring out a new way to understand it to be able to then teach it that way. But I think the thing that Caitlin was touching on that what I liked about it was it gave students multiple, like so many tools and avenues into understanding the math instead of the rote procedural way to do it, and understand that math is everywhere and it's all connected and it can be used for so many things. I had many students that struggled really hard with the like procedural rote, typical way that we would do like multiplication or addition. And then we would do it with, drawing the pictures and things like that, and it would click for them and you'd see that light bulb come on, and it was the only time that they really felt like they had access to understanding. And it just provides so many tools. It's very slow and it's supposed to be sort of scaffolded on things, and I think Common Core in general is that way. Yeah. And it's trying to build a more holistic understanding so that it's not just like I know how to do it but I don't know why it works that way, intended to help sort of create later on, critical thinking stuff that sometimes doesn't get touched on until people first, at least for me, things that I really didn't deal with until I got to college, at least the thinking kind of skills that it builds and how all of it's really connected. So that's why I enjoyed it. But I do understand it was really difficult because, like for me, I wasn't taught that way, and parents had trouble helping their kids because it was different from the way they learned it.
Yeah. So it's interesting that a lot of times when I play word association with Common Core, I get about the political side of Common Core. What I'm hearing is largely about the the standards themselves, which quite frankly is a much more informed and better conversation than the political side, because the way in which Common Core became distorted into a political topic was largely fueled by the frustration of families that y'all are touching on, but was really not about the Common Core at all. It was from a political standpoint, Common Core became a buzzword for sort of President Obama trying to impose federal control on local schools. And there is an element of that in what happened here, in that the No Child Left Behind waivers were not conditioned, but were strongly encouraging states to adopt the Common Core. But of course, the sort of more nuanced version of that was that the Common Core was actually a state-developed curriculum in the first place. And so it was a very complicated political issue that just became symbolic for, Obama's trying to take over the schools and protect our liberty and autonomy in schools. And that is what Common Core ended up sort of symbolizing. And so what you saw sort of in the run up to the 2016 election and in its aftermath, a lot of states that had adopted Common Core sort of were dropping Common Core. And in a state like Tennessee, which had adopted Common Core, they then dropped it, but really then readopted it and just called it Tennessee Core or something like that. And so, it has become associated with a larger federalism argument. Evan, is that really what it's called?
Yep.
I think it's TN Core, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think
Right.
I think you're right, Evan.
Yeah. And so it's just, like I said, it's part of a larger federalism argument in our country, that is about everything from mask mandates to school curricula. So it is, very much a part of that. But for our purposes, it's really not, right? Like it is, you know, we all are talking mostly about the sort of technical, actual. It sounds like the mail carrier has arrived, and Toby wants out. Sorry, let's see if Toby gets really worked up about federalism. Come here. Y'all know Toby and the federalism from con law. There he is. Say hi, Tobes. Can you speak? Yep. There's Toby. Okay. You ready to get down, or are you good? Did y'all meet Pippa yet? Not yet. It's not going to happen today. Ugh. But we'll get her in here at some point. So anywho, so that's the Common Core story. I think we're good with sort of what it is and what it isn't. What happens is the Common Core ignites this resistance to No Child Left Behind that leads to the reauthorization in 2015 of the statute, and it's now called Every Student Succeeds. And what it really is dialing back the influence of the federal government. Because what No Child Left Behind did, without any sort of embarrassment or without being ambiguous about it, is it increased the federal role in a way that the Every Student Succeeds Act is trying to dial back. Okay, and so that's kind of where we are. So I'm going to pause here, as we transition to talking about school choice, and ask, are there questions about that narrative of standards in our education, and/or comments about the idea of labeling schools failing, which is one of the great legacies of No Child Left Behind? Questions, comments, reactions?
I have a comment. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Was someone else going to go?
No, you go for it. Go for it, Rose.
Oh, okay. So what more so my comment is about the labeling of failing schools. I guess to make a long story short, I worked for my school. The school I worked for is the Achievement School District school. So it's essentially reformed a school that was deemed failing. But the why I don't like the language per se is because the community kind of gets stigmatized with that language as well. And when you're passionate about the community you work in and you're trying to make change in that education system, it's a lot of, even if the school, I guess, district changes, it's still associated with that history. If that makes any sense. So that was my comment.
Yeah, it becomes a label that's hard to shake, no matter what changes occur in the school. Once that label is there, the perception is there, and that, that could, right? If you're giving people the benefit of the doubt, that could spur the investment needed to improve. Okay, but it also could stigmatize and maybe even generate feelings of inferiority in communities. Other thoughts, reactions, comments, questions? Yeah, David.
I think the thing that sometimes like maybe was, or I don't know if it was missed with it, but like if the idea at the beginning of this was to prepare kids to compete at like the highest standards, and we change the names, we start like reducing the standards and make it so that everybody feels good about themselves. I think that there was really good intent with No Child Left Behind to compete on the national stage, but I think we've also sort of been selling our kids short and continue to sell our kids short when it comes to funding education. That we can't expect a kid to come up and compete when we're not preparing them to do it. And when I was teaching to those really high standards, I mean, yeah, we were getting kids who were 2, 3, 4, 5 grade levels below where they were supposed to be, but we knew, because there was that set of standards and because we were able to test it like very regularly of like where they were at, like we knew what things they needed to learn, and what, like if we wanted to teach them a middle school, like a 7th grade concept, but we saw that they were missing a 3rd grade skill, that was necessary, like we could, that scaffolding, like we knew exactly what we needed to teach to get them back to grade level. And I think that testing always gets a bad name too, but I think if you have regular testing that is done and you get the results back quickly to which you can respond to them, I think that there was or maybe still is a lot of potential to actually educate our kids the way they need to be to compete on a global scale, on a global level.
I think that you're right that testing gets a bad rap in a lot of for a lot of the same reasons that the alternative math does, in that it seems that people who are bothered by it are bothered in part by the way that it does not necessarily reflect their own schooling experience. But it's undoubtedly true, and any teacher will tell you this, that teaching without evaluating is not really teaching, right? It's just lecturing and hoping that people get something. And so, again, I don't really want to open the can of worms into what type of teaching, what kind of testing is more valid or better reflective, of sort of performance. But there has to be something. Like I think any educator would tell you there has to be some sort of regularized evaluation feedback loop in order for education to be happening. The other thought that I had in reaction, David, to your comment, and this I'll just sort of open up to everyone. You said, I think that the intent is there to do something, right? Like you're not putting on those that are pursuing education reform a desire to sabotage education in order to deny an entire generation of people their opportunity to succeed in American life. Okay, there are some people that do put that bad intent onto. And so my question is, this isn't the first time where I feel like we've seen intent to intervened by the either the implementation stage or the sort of depth of challenges that are being confronted. Why is it that our intent is not enough to really shake up the inequality that we have in American education? But maybe not. Maybe I can see y'all moving now. Heather, I see your hand up.
I was just going to say, this kind of reminds me of the Plessy versus Brown. Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board conversation we kind of had, where intent doesn't necessarily mean action when it should be. So in context of inequalities in the schools, teachers could have the best intent, school districts could have the best intent, but if there's no action towards like your intent, like it's nice to like say you want things done and try to and like try your best, I guess, like with the resources you're given. But if you're not given the actual amount of resources you need, or you know, like you're put down by by a system that, you know, doesn't necessarily jive with how you teach, or it does, I don't know. Basically what I'm saying is intent isn't action. So that's where the inequalities come from.
But it's not enough in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Let me move forward for a moment as we do make this pivot towards choice. So accountability and standards are a major part of the No Child Left Behind era, but it's accompanied and it's run simultaneously with this desire for an increase in school choice. And I just want to show you in the statute where that shows itself. So I'm pulling up that key statutory provisions from No Child Left Behind here. Let's see. Can y'all see that on the screen? Yep. Okay. So this is in the part that says if a school continues to not achieve adequate yearly progress for any of the groups or for the whole of its student population, what do you do? Okay, and so I'm really focusing here in this particular part. One, replace the school staff who are relevant to the failure to make adequate yearly progress. Just as a side note, there's a whole other, you know, just like there's a whole class that could be about testing, there's also a whole course that could be about the sort of labor relations between teachers and school districts. And No Child Left Behind has a huge impact on that, including the sort of push towards putting school teacher pay, connecting that to student performance. But that is something that we can talk about further, but you know, is not sort of front and center here. Option two, you have to do at least one of these. Replace all the school staff that are relevant to the failure. Institute and fully implement a new curriculum, including new professional development for the staff. And then this kind of should remind us of Castaneda a little bit, based on scientifically based research, and offers substantial promise of improving educational achievement. Decrease management authority at the school level. What does that mean to anybody? What do you think that they're talking about there? Significantly decrease management authority at the school level. No ideas? Who runs the school at the school level typically?
You're basically taking it out of the hands of the local school administration.
And by local school administration, you mean
The vice principal.
the principal, exactly, right? So it's removing the principal's typical discretion to run the school. And so you're moving it where, Renee? Where would you be moving that management authority?
That's a good question. Would the school district then have the authority for that school?
Yeah, normally what this is going to look like is the school district taking over more control of the school. So you're moving authority for running the school away from the building and towards the school district. Similar things happening with this next one. Appoint an outside expert to advise the school on its progress toward blah, blah, blah. Extend the school year or school day. So we can make it a year-round school or a 8 to 5 school or something like that. That's meant to capture some of the research that suggests the danger of content loss from lack of time in school, which is a very significant topic right now in the COVID times. Restructure the internal organizational structure of the school. That's not external. That is internal. So that's after failing for, I think, 2 years to make adequate yearly progress. Then if we push down a little further, if you fail an additional year, okay, what do? You continue to do all these other things, okay? But in addition to that, we have what's called alternative governance. So after 3 years of failure to make adequate yearly progress, the school must implement one of the following alternative government arrangements for the school. One, reopening the school as a public charter school. Two, replacing all or most of the school staff who are relevant to the failure. Three, entering into a contract with an entity such as a private management company with a demonstrated record of effectiveness to operate the public school. So that's just like a charter school, basically. Four, and Rose, you'll probably have something to say about this one, turning the operation of the school over to the state educational agency if permitted under state law. So now not just the school district taking over the school, but the state taking over the school. And then five, anything else. Okay, and so what we see with this list is that as time progresses and schools continue to fail to make adequate yearly progress under No Child Left Behind, the schools are being forced to do one of these four really things in order to maintain operation, right? In order to stay in business. One of them is turn it into a charter school. One of them is turn it over to the state. And I was just argue that that's pushing school authority in two different directions, right? Turning it over to the state is taking the operation of the school from the principal and the school and turning it into the sort of highest level of government in the jurisdiction, the state. So we're jumping over the school district, we're jumping over sort of any sort of local control, and we're just saying state control. The other option at the other extreme is to open the school as a charter school in which the only, as opposed to the state, which is jurisdiction over everybody, the charter school only has jurisdiction over the students in the charter school. And so it's instead of moving authority up the ladder to the state, it's moving it actually down. It's also cutting the school district out, but it's empowering the in-school officials to have greater decision-making authority and autonomy. Okay, and so this is sort of what's brewing in the background of No Child Left Behind, and essentially, what happens. So this is 2001. This is before there are, as many charter schools as there are today. And in fact, the growth in charter schools is encouraged by No Child Left Behind, but really accelerated with the race to the top and the No Child Left Behind waivers of the sort of 2008 to 2013 or 14 period. And so I guess I want to pause and for questions on what are charter schools, okay? Because they are now going to play a role in the way in which education structurally gets changed in mostly in American cities, not so much outside of cities in the 21st century. So are there questions on what are charter schools? My guess is that there's a range of knowledge on this in this class, that some of you are very familiar with what charter schools are, and some of you hear the word and really don't know what I'm talking about. Can someone confirm that there are some in this class who doesn't know a lot? Thank you. Okay, there we go. So there are people who for whom we need to have a little bit of a primer on charter schools. Okay. So typically what we have in our structure is a school board that is elected and a superintendent who is appointed by the school board, and then a bunch of principals, and then teachers and students, right? That's normally, they're all part of a sort of pyramid of authority leading up to the elected school board. And I think if we go back to the very beginning, that school board is responsible for educating all the students in its geographical boundaries. What a charter school is an agreement. It's formed by an agreement between the school board usually and some private entity. So let's say our class wanted to start a charter school. Okay, we said we know how to teach. We can be really effective with elementary school students, so we're going to start a charter school. Well, we can come together with a plan, and we'll probably have to have something more than just me saying, I think we're really good. But we'll come and we'll put a plan together and we'll say, we would like to apply, school district, for a charter to operate a school in your geographic area. So the charter in charter school is like a contract between the school district and this private entity, our class, right? Our class, Education and Civil Rights, Inc. And we will then, if we get the charter, we'll have an agreement and they'll say, okay, you can run a school with the goals that you've set out, using the methods that you've set out, serving the type of students that you've identified in our jurisdiction. And we, the school district, will pass through funding to you to run the school. Okay, so that's structurally what it looks like. Normally, what it looks like is a school that has to attract students to it. Okay, so unlike most schools, which have students drawn from, like their neighborhood or set, school zone, school attendance zone, a charter school is typically a school of choice, which means it's a school that parents have to decide to send their kid to. And to the extent that there are parents who do so, the school district sort of funnels the per pupil funding to the charter school to serve those students. So from the parents' standpoint, it's free. Okay, it's a public school like any other public school in that way, but it's set apart from other public schools because it doesn't have to follow the same rules. It operates independently of the school district, of the school board, of the superintendent. It's like its own little fiefdom. Okay, so the charter school operates and it's responsible for its kids, and it has to abide by some state laws, but not the same as a traditional public school. And it cannot charge families for enrollment. And so all of that is captured in the phrasing, a privately run public school. Okay, that is generally what a charter school is, a privately operated public school. Okay, so I'll pause here. Questions? Okay, so you can perhaps see that what is gained in a charter school that is distinct from a traditional public school, at least theoretically, is independence and autonomy. Okay, that it can do things differently than a traditional public school can because it's freed from a lot of the local school district policies on how you hire teachers or how you pay teachers or how teachers have to be qualified or what curriculum you use or how long your school day is or how long each class is. You might adopt a like block schedule or an every other day schedule or you get all this kind of flexibility that you don't have to like if a regular school wanted to do that, they'd have to get permission from the assistant superintendent for whatever, and they would have to say, oh no, you can't do that because if we let you do that, then every other school will do that, and that's going to be a big problem in a big district. Okay, but a charter school doesn't have to run up the flagpole. They just do what they want to do, right? They have a lot of autonomy. The flip side of that autonomy, though, is that their entire existence depends on performance. So unlike a traditional public school, which is it's very difficult, like sometimes schools close for, for sort of demographic reasons, that the neighborhood population has diminished. There's not as many kids in the neighborhood, et cetera. So schools do close, traditional schools do close. But charter schools commit, in order to get their charter, to a certain level of performance on state standardized tests, or else they lose their charter and go out of business. So when we start our school, we're going to be laser focused on making sure our students do well enough, because it's not just that we want that to happen because we're good in our hearts and we believe in education, which we probably do, but it's because if we don't, then our whole enterprise is gone. Okay, so it's extreme autonomy on one hand and somewhat extreme accountability on the other. Okay, that a charter school, at least in theory, a charter school's very existence depends on its performance in a way that a traditional school does not. Okay, and so that is the sort of big picture. Haley, I see your question. What happens to kids that went there if their school closes? Do you mean if a charter school gets closed?
Yeah, so I was just kind of curious, did like the kids just like it just kind of, I mean, does it happen in the middle of the school year, or is it like between each school year, or is it just seems kind of like just suddenly the kids wake up one year and their school's closed just because like other kids didn't meet the standards?
Yep, it happens. So sometimes it happens in the middle of a school year, though hopefully infrequently. But even when it doesn't, even when it happens between school years, for students that are going from grade to grade, that's still disruptive, right? Last year I was in third grade at school X, and now I have to find another school because school X is out of business. It is hugely disruptive. Jamae has put it in here. A lot of times what will happen is those students will enroll back in their neighborhood school, the school that their geography assigns them to. They might choose to go to another charter school, but the main point is they just have to pick a new school, Haley, and that is, hugely disruptive. So Taylor, I see your question. Is that the question you want to ask? The one in the chat? So in the chat, Taylor says, doesn't it kind of defeat the purpose of having an independent school if they still have to take the same state standardized tests? And the sort of more extreme charter school advocates would say, absolutely. The whole point is that we know how to do this better than, we have a good sort of innovative way of doing education, and we shouldn't have to take the tests. There are no states, however, that go that far. They say that if you are going to be a part of the public system, the state law requires you to continue to administer and adhere to the accountability as mandated in those standards. The pushback against charter schools is often that they're allowed to play by different rules. And this is one way in which that's not true. There are a lot of ways in which it very much is true, perhaps most importantly with regard to recruitment of students. But here, with regard to test taking, they are not exempt from taking it. The state is still providing the funding, and in order to ensure their investment, I guess, is the way that the state lawmakers might think of it, they require this continued participation in the testing regime. Is that, Taylor, responsive? I think you're thinking about it the right way. If we're talking about autonomy, why don't we go full in on autonomy? But the law hasn't endorsed that, and maybe that's why vouchers are more of a topic now, at least from some parts of society, because vouchers really would get that kind of potential independence from even the state testing. Chris, your hand's up.
Yeah, I had a question because you said that the So it's school choice, but it's also funded by the government. So is the government, do they like impose like mandatory population requirements? Like if you don't have X amount of students, we're just going to close you down. And if they do, does that mean like charter schools go and like try to like recruit and like advertise to get kids to go to school there?
Yes, yes on everything, right? They have to have a certain threshold of students in order to open. And absolutely, yes, they are recruiting. So, and I just note just one quick thing that popped into my mind. Another form of independence is like in COVID, they don't have to abide by our school district is or isn't going to have virtual classes. You know, a charter school can make their decision autonomously, but recruitment of students, Chris, I'll ask you this. Do you think that the school district, the traditional school district, likes seeing charter schools recruiting students to them?
I don't think so. That's why I asked. It seems like they would be poaching students or something, and then that would maybe like impact the funding that the public school gets. So it's maybe like a weird funding war kind of a thing.
That is exactly the conflicts that exist, right? So charter schools have kind of gotten to the point, at least in our community and in many cities, where they are somewhat entrenched and exist as just a part of the landscape now. But certainly 10 years ago, in Memphis and in a lot of other places, it's wars because every student is a per pupil funding balloon, and they come with that. And the school district that loses, let's say, 8,000 students to charter schools go to they lose 8,000 per pupil balloons and filled with dollars, and they still have to pay the teachers as though they still have those 8,000 students, right? Those teacher contracts still exist. They still have the textbooks and the desks and the physical space, but now they don't have the 8,000 students, and they don't have the money that comes with them. So it's really problematic. And then, so yes, and you probably see the billboards. If you look for them, they're there. Billboards recruiting for charter schools, and quite frankly, now you see billboards for traditional schools as well. The idea underlying all of this, and Rose, I'm going to get to you in just one second. Rose and Takesha, I see y'all's hands, is competition, right? So Chris has hit on this idea that schools are competing for students, and that school districts probably don't like that. But the theory underlying the charter school movement and really school choice more broadly, and again, I would try to separate this out from what school choice has become in political parlance, which is a little bit different. Kind of like Common Core, like when these topics become political topics, they get morphed into the same political discussion that everything else is about. And I think school choice suffers from that, just like Common Core did. But the underlying theory of school choice is really a market-based competition for students. That if you provide families with choice, then it incentivizes schools to be better, to be innovative, to be distinct, to offer something that the consumer will desire, which might be an innovative education program, but also might be high quality in terms of teaching and overall performance. And so the idea here is that what we will unleash is a market competition for students that will drive schools to get better and better and better and better. And that students not choosing a school. So, it's been implicit in this conversation. I think the question that Haley asked, what happens if a charter school closes? Sometimes they do, right? And I suppose you would say that's an example of a competitor in the market failing, and they should close if they're not doing good, even though that's disruptive for students. and that presumably the ones that close are the ones that aren't doing very well, and that the ones that stay are the ones that are drawing students and therefore are doing well, or at least in theory are doing well. And so this idea of a churn in schools is what underlies school choice. Competition breeds innovation, which breeds better achievement overall in a school landscape. Okay, Rose first, and then Takesha.
So I should be quick. I tried to write down my thoughts so I didn't lose them. But my first thought, I know you mentioned the autonomy of charter schools, and I just wanted to comment on that because I don't want people who don't know this to think that that means teachers have autonomy. They definitely really don't. In that sense, teachers are still told what to do. They're just told what to do by a different person, per se. And with that, I think a lot of the same struggles that like Caitlin and Evan had mentioned, just about, and David even, just about wanting to do what's best for kids, that's still an issue. But with the charter school, a lot of the times every year it's almost like year one when you work there for years because of what's at stake. Because the charter is at stake, the school's always trying to figure out what they're doing best. And so curriculum changes every year, this changes every year, and it seems sometimes to me, things could be more detrimental in a sense where there wasn't consistency, or we're just testing stuff to see what works. That part I didn't love. And then, as I mentioned, my school was, we formed a Shelby County school. So I was there at the time where half of our school was K-5, was Achievement School District, with our public charter under Capstone Education Group. And then 6 to 8 in the same building, mind you, was Shelby County schools. And it was, I mean, for students, it was chaotic. You have teachers who are no longer going to be working there due to the charter taking, reforming and taking over. I'm trying to use the word reform because takeover can be very negative and seem very negative, and all charter schools are not bad in my opinion. So I'm trying to use the word reform for that reason. But it is, as Haley was wondering, it is disruptive, and it's confusing to kids and it's confusing to communities. And so it's not an easy process.
And the school that you're describing, it sounds like probably had 2 different principals operating under 2 different bosses, right? The charter school principals reporting to the charter school board, which may or may not be active. And the Shelby County Schools principal is reporting to the superintendent and the elected board. I will note that there is not really elected board oversight of charter schools. So to the extent that there is, that in our discussions previously, we've had local control and sort of democratic control being a hallmark of the public education system, charter schools do operate somewhat outside of that traditional model. Takesha.
Okay, so I also taught at a charter school. I taught at KIPP, which was a really big network. I actually went to KIPP when I was in 5th grade. So I was really excited to go back and teach for the same network. But when you mentioned the laser focused approach that charter schools take, I was thinking about like my experience as a student at KIPP when it first began as a charter school, and then what it became when I was a teacher, and that laser focus had kind of changed. So like the challenges that charter schools deal with trying to uphold those high standards can sometimes be difficult. And then also how that laser focus is sometimes, I know at least at my school, is directly correlated to like stricter disciplinary actions for the students in the schools. So I know we went over some cases, and some of the issues that arose were talking about how a lot of students that were receiving services, they pointed out the behavior issues that students had. So one of the things that's also very different in charter schools that's often criticized is the type of discipline actions they take, like having to walk in lines, or having to sit with your hands on your desk and sit up straight, like different things that a lot of policymakers and advocates often write about and criticize because they feel like a lot of those behaviors are kind of similar to those in prison. And then, yeah, so just also the challenge of upholding the standards, and then the competition that comes with trying to compete with other new charter schools, like the older networks have a lot of challenges trying to keep up with
Good.
the requirements.
And they and KIPP is an example of a network that has a lot of resources nationally, but a lot of charter schools are sort of recreating themselves. You know, each new charter school is building a school from scratch, and so some of the, you know, things that both Rose and Takesha are describing about sort of in the halls of charter schools, what does it look like? In some places, I guess I try not to paint with too broad of a brush, right? There's some charter schools that are really successful, and there's some charter schools that are fine, and there's some charter schools that really stink. And they kind of run the gamut, but they don't have the same kind of they just have a different focus from that's driven by, as Takesha said, this pressure that their the student performance is their very existence depends on it. Caitlin, I see your hand, and I feel like there's a lot of enthusiasm for this topic. I hope it's not just among those who are talking. So I kind of set Friday aside. I wasn't sure which direction we were going to go, but I'm thinking maybe I'll pull some resources together that have some critiques and some pros regarding charter schools, and we'll continue this conversation as well on Friday. But go ahead, Caitlin.
I also taught at a KIPP school. Takesha and I both did, and I did not go to school there. But during my last year of teaching, I was most uncomfortable by the school began to put teachers into different tracks. So they created a rigor tract, meaning like and they also had like a classroom management tract. So the teachers who were in that tract were the only instruction that they got and feedback from the school and from the district was about how they were managing their classroom. And so unless you hit like a certain threshold of how you were managing your classroom, meaning like how your students were behaving in your classroom, then you didn't get any instruction on how to push your students academically until you met certain standards, which I understand some of those things, but that was just really, I didn't enjoy that because the students that were in the
why would you?
Of course
That's terrible.
Like, yeah, it was horrible, but like the students that were in but that just is also the nature of like KIPP hired a lot of first year, never had any experience as a teacher, and so you have to have an element of that. But then what happens to the students' learnings that are in the teachers' classrooms that are on a rigor track, and the only thing that they're getting instruction on is how to be a better classroom manager, which I had to learn that as well. But yeah, so that just was kind of new language when I was on my way out.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's Caitlin makes a point there that is one of the regular critiques of charter schools, which is the turnover in teaching core. And there's pros and cons to that probably, but it is definitely factually the case that there are more teachers with less experience in charter schools than in traditional schools. And part of this, and this is kind of important to keep in mind, is because charter schools are able to operate independently of the teachers' union contract that a school district typically operates with. So this means that probably teachers are paid less in charter schools. They're not in the same retirement program, although a charter school can contract to put them in that. But the main point is that the charter school has more autonomy in hiring of teachers because they are exempt from the teachers union contract. So just like I think I was saying how everything sort of is so much federalism, big picture American society arguments exist in the education space. This is a long-standing labor versus management story in American history with the teachers union, and which is one of the more powerful unions in our country, and sort of the push to weaken the teachers union. And so again, it's a topic that isn't really in our wheelhouse from equity standpoint, but it's just sort of showing you that almost every topic that is contested in American society works its way into some sort of school version, right? A school flavor of the federalism argument, a school flavor of the labor versus management history that we have. And so we'll continue this. So I don't want to necessarily go down that road too much, but we'll continue talk. I'll gather some materials, make that available for Friday. We'll continue this conversation then. Okay. Sound good? All right, and look for an email from me in the next 2 days with the response paper info. Okay. See you guys later.